After this lesson, students will be able to model real-world situations with linear equations. Do now. The cost of a pizza from Pinocchio's Pizzeria can be modeled by the linear equation y equals 0.5x plus 12. Label what each part of the equation represents in the context of the real-world situation. Pause the movie to try the do now on your own and resume when you're ready. Let's start by discussing what the x and the y represent. The x represents the number of toppings that you get, which is the independent variable or input. That's what changes about the pizza to determine our output or y value, which represents the total cost of the pizza, because the cost depends on how many toppings you add. Now 12 is the y-intercept. The y-intercept is where the line crosses the y-axis, and at that point the x-coordinate is 0. Since x represents the number of toppings you get, when x is 0, that means that there are no toppings, and therefore 12 represents the cost of a plain cheese pizza without toppings. So a plain cheese pizza costs $12. Now the 0.5 represents the slope, which is the rate of change of your cost compared with the rate of change of the toppings. That means that each topping costs 50 cents, since the total price increases by 50 cents for each additional topping. A car dealership has 40 cars in stock. The auto manufacturer will deliver new cars to the dealership by car carrier. Each carrier holds 6 cars. Write a linear function that relates the number of carriers used to the total number of cars at the dealership. Graph the function that models the situation. So in this case, the car dealership has 40 cars in stock. That means that even when no car carriers have come yet, we already have 40 cars there. That is our y-intercept. 0 car carriers have arrived, but we already have 40 cars in stock. Now our slope is 6, because for each additional carrier that comes, your total number of cars in stock increases by 6. X represents the number of car carriers that arrive, and Y represents the total number of cars that will be in stock. So now we can go ahead and make a graph. We'll title our graph Transporting Cars. Our X represents the number of car carriers. Our Y represents the total number of cars. And we can label, I'll go by tens. And then the number of cars. So our y-intercept is 40, which means when x is 0, we have a total of 40 cars. So 0 car carriers, we start with 40 cars. When we have 1 car carrier, that brings 6 more. So 40 plus our 6 times 1, which is 6, gives us 46. 2 car carriers would be 6 times 2, or 12 cars, in addition to the 40 cars that are already there, which would give us 52 total. 3 car carriers, we'd have 6 times 3, which is 18, plus 40, which gives us 58. 4 car carriers, 6 times 4 is 24, plus 40 is 64. 5 car carriers would be 6 times 5, or 30, plus the 40 gives us 70. And now that I can see that this is making a straight line, I can use a straight edge to connect these dots. And this will continue all the way to the edge of the graph. And I can put an arrow that shows even if I bring more car carriers than 18, it will continue to increase the total number of cars in stock by 6. What information about the situation does the point with the coordinates 5, 70 give you? Well, 5 is our x-coordinate, which represents the number of car carriers, and 70 represents the y-coordinate, which is the total number of cars in stock. So this means you will have 70 total cars in stock after 5 car carriers arrive. Now you try this problem on your own, so pause the movie and resume when you're ready. The Eptikisik Business Corporation drew the following graph to represent how much money would be in the school fund after washing cars at a fundraiser. What does the slope and y-intercept mean for the given situation? Well, let's begin with our y-intercept. Our y-intercept looks like it's about $25, approximately. Now, a y-intercept is what the y value is when your x value is 0. That means that no cars have been washed and you already have a balance of $25. So the y-intercept shows that the school or the class fund already has $25 even before washing any cars. Now the slope represents the change in y compared to the change in x. So you can see, for example, pick a point where you can see very clearly what the ordered pair is. So for example, 2, 30, which shows that if we started at 25 for 0 cars, so 0, 25, and now when you have 2 cars washed, you're at 30. Now you can calculate your slope using the slope formula. y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, which is 5/2, or 2.5, which in this case would be $2.50. This means they charge $2.50 for each car. If the graph had the same slope but a y-intercept of 15, what could you conclude about the fundraiser? Well, if your y-intercept is 15, that means that the class fund had $15 before washing any cars. If the graph had a slope of 5, what could you conclude about the fundraiser? Well, the slope is your rate of change, the change in the balance compared to the number of cars washed. So this would mean that each car cost $5. So they charged $5 to wash each car. Suppose you drew the following graph to represent how far you ride your bike at a steady rate. What is your rate? Well, your rate is your distance, your change in distance, compared to the change in time. So we can pick 2 points that we can see very clearly on the graph. So you can pick any 2 points that you know for sure are on there. For example, I know that 0, 0 is a point on the graph, and this one's a little hard to tell, so I'm going to move on until I see one where I can see very clearly. For example, 0.5, 6. So I'm going to choose that one since I can clearly see both the x and the y coordinates without having to guess. And now I calculate my slope. y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, which is 6 over 0.5. Now to simplify this, you can think of it as 6 divided by 1/2, which is 6 over 1 divided by 1/2. And to divide fractions, we would do 6 times the reciprocal of 1/2, which is 2. And therefore, the answer is 12 miles per hour. Another option, if you didn't want to change this into a fraction and use the reciprocal, is starting from here, 6 over 0.5, you could multiply both the numerator and the denominator by 10 in order to get rid of this decimal, which would give you 60 over 5, or 12. If the graph had a slope of 10, what could you conclude about your bike ride? Well, your slope represents your rate of change, which in this case is the change in distance over the change in time. And therefore, the slope of 10 means that you traveled 10 miles per hour. The equation h equals 8 minus 2t models the height in inches of a burning candle as a function of time in hours. Explain what is happening in its real-world context. Well, in this case, you'll notice that instead of it being written as y equals mx plus b, it's really written as y equals b plus mx. So the two have been switched around. What this is showing, if you want to rewrite it, you can, so that you're more clear on which part is which, is that your y-intercept is 8. And that means that when t is 0, or that no hours have passed, the candle is 8 inches tall. So the candle begins at 8 inches tall before burning. Now the slope, -2, is the rate of change of the height compared to the time, which means the candle loses 2 inches in height each hour. How tall will the candle be after 3 hours? Well, we can substitute 3 in for our time, or t. So we have 8 minus 6, or 2. So the candle will be 2 inches after 3 hours. Suppose you borrow money from a relative to buy a lawnmower that costs $245. You charge $18 to mow a lawn. Write a rule to describe your profit, P of n, as a function of the number of lawns mowed, n, And part B, what will your profit be after you mow 20 lawns? See if you can try this question on your own, so pause the movie and resume when you're ready. So we're trying to find our profit, P of N. Your rate of change, or slope, is $18 because you're earning $18 for each lawn that you mow, and therefore that is your rate of change. So 18, and then our input is N, which represents the number of lawns mowed, and then we have to figure out our y-intercept, which is how much money you have in profit before you mow any lawns. Well, if you borrowed money from a relative that you borrowed $245, that means you're actually starting in debt. So you're starting at negative $245. To calculate what your profit will be after you mow 20 lawns, you can substitute 20 in for N. So P of 20 equals 18 times 20 minus 245. 18 times 2 is 36, and then add the 0 at the end. And you get 115, which means your profit will be $115 after 20 lawns. A helicopter takes off from the roof of a 200-foot building. Write an equation modeling its altitude if it rises 100 feet every 2 minutes. In this case, we need to calculate our slope because they tell us that it rises 100 feet every 2 minutes. So to calculate our rate of change, we calculate the rate of change in the height, which is 100, over the rate of change of our x, which in this case is time, or 2 minutes. This tells us that the slope is 50 feet per minute. So now we know that the height is equal to 50 times the number of minutes, which I can make x or t, but since I chose y, I think I'll stick with x and y. And then our y-intercept is where it starts from, so what its altitude is after no minutes have passed. Well, if the helicopter takes off from the roof of a 200-foot building, it actually starts 200 feet above the ground. So our equation is y equals 50x plus 200. To calculate what the altitude will be after 6 minutes, I can plug in 6 for x. So y equals 50 times 6 plus 200. Y equals 300 plus 200, and we get 500. So the altitude will be 500 feet after 6 minutes. You try the next question on your own, so pause the movie and resume when you're ready. A helicopter is at 675 feet and about to start its descent. It descends 45 feet every minute. Write an equation modeling the altitude of the helicopter. In this case, the helicopter is going down, so our rise is actually negative. Therefore, our slope is negative 45, and we're starting at 675, our y-intercept. In how many minutes will the helicopter be on the ground? Well, in this case, they don't give us the number of minutes, which is our input, or x. Instead, they give us our y-coordinate, our output. The ground has a height of 0. So we can substitute 0 in for y and then solve for x, which is the number of minutes. So negative 675 divided by negative 45 will tell us x. This goes in once. And now to figure out 45 going into 225. Let's see if 5 works. And it does. So the helicopter will be on the ground in 15 minutes.